Hey, this video is the introduction to imaginary numbers. There's quite a bit more that we will do with this, but this is just the start. So on this first one, we need to solve the equation. You could solve it by factoring, but another way that you can solve it is by taking the square root of both sides. And the square root of x squared is just x. Now most people would say the square root of 25 is 5, which is true, but it's also negative 5. When we take the square root of a number, we get both positive and negative. So many times in geometry, we ignore the negative because we're talking about the length of a side, but that negative still exists. It's really plus or minus 5. Okay, so what happens over here on number 2? Because in algebra we preach to you that you cannot take the square root of a negative number. Well, that changes today. We can rewrite this as 36 times negative 1. So when I solve this, I take the square root of everything. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 36 is plus or minus 6. And the square root of negative 1, well, that is the imaginary unit. It is I. So now we can get an answer. We have an I with it. Okay, so now let's try solving some of these equations. So on this one, I'm going to rewrite this as 121 times negative 1. I'm going to take the square root of everything. The square root of 121 is plus or minus 11, and the square root of negative 1, we now know, is I, and that's how we're going to write the answer. Okay, on number 4, I'm going to rewrite this as 48 times negative 1. Take the square root of everything. I'm going to start this up here because I'm going to run out of space if I don't. So 48, it's not a perfect square, so I have to make a factor tree. 2 and 24, 2 and 12, 2 and 6, 2 and 3. Okay, let's think about this a little bit. When I rewrite this, square root of x squared is x. Then, plus or minus, outside of the radical, I have a pair. Each pair represents one number. And this goes underneath, and the square root of negative 1 is I. If I simplify that some more, I get x is plus or minus 4 square root 3 I. And that is my answer. I know, it's strange and it's a lot to remember. All right, on number 5, I'm going to rewrite this as 7 times the square root of negative 1. Whoops. Not the square root of negative 1, just negative 1. But then I'm going to take the square root of everything, and over here I get x. The square root of 7 will not simplify anymore, so I'm just going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 7. And the square root of negative 1 is just I. That's it. Okay, on the last one, I'm going to rewrite this as 72 times negative 1. So I'm going to take the square root of everything. So on 72, if I break this down, I would have 2 and 36, 6 and 6, 2 and 3, 3 and 2. Okay, so when I write it, the square root of x squared is x. Plus or minus. Outside I have a 2 because there's a pair of 2's, and I have a 3 because I have a pair of 3's. Inside I have the 2. The square root of negative 1 is I. So when I rewrite this, I get plus or minus 6 square root 2 I. Alright, so now this goes with imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers are numbers that are written some number b times I. B will represent any number except 0. Okay, so when we talk about an imaginary number, it's going to have a number like 3, 1/3, square root of 7, something, and then I. A complex number is going to be written like this, A plus BI. So for example, a complex number could look like 7 plus 4i. That'd be a complex number. Now what we're going to do for the rest of these notes is just add and subtract complex numbers. We're going to do a lot more and a lot more in depth following class. Okay, so on number 1, because I'm just adding these two things, all I need to do is combine like terms. And if you think of these i's as being x's, like when you did in Algebra 1, same thing. -4 and -2 is -6. 6i and -9i, well, they're opposite signs, so I subtract, take the sign of the bigger number, -3i. Now on 2, because it's a minus, we got to be more careful because I'm really not just subtracting the first term, I'm subtracting everything in the parentheses. So I'm going to change the minus to a plus, and then I'm going to change the sign of everything in the parentheses. Now that I've done that, now I can combine like terms. So I have 8 and 2, which is 10, and -5 and -7i would give me -12i, and that's my answer. Okay, on number 9, it's a plus, so I don't have to do anything. Combine like terms. -9 and 7 is -2. And then over here, 8i and 11i would give us 19i. All right, number 4, we've got another subtraction one. So remember, you're subtracting everything that's in the parentheses. So I'm going to change the minus to a plus and then change the sign of everything. Now I can combine like terms. -12 and 2 is -10. 14i and -3i would be 11i. And that's it. There's your answers.